before there were pyramids in Giza, before the name Egypt was whispered to the stars. There was a land of silent gold and endless sun, a place the Nile embraced like a secret lover. That land was Kush. The Kingdom of Kush, a name almost erased by time, rose from the southern cradle of the Nile, in the rugged deserts of Nubia, where the sun burns gold into the stones, and the river flows like a mirror to the heavens. For centuries, they were called the people of the bow, tall, dark-skinned archers, fierce and proud. To Egypt, they were both rivals and kin. To the gods, they were a people of destiny. In the beginning, Kush was not an empire. It was a rhythm, a pulse of small chiefdoms clinging to the Nile's life-giving water. The people farmed, fished, and traded ivory, incense, and gold. But beneath the humble thatched villages and desert sands, destiny was stirring. The ancient Egyptians looked southward and saw in Kush the raw strength of men and the glimmer of treasure. They invaded, again and again, seeking gold, ebony, and slaves. But something unexpected happened. Kush did not die. Instead, it watched. It learned. For centuries, the Kushites lived in the long shadow of Egyptian power, absorbing their art, their writing, their gods, until the day came when the shadow began to move in the opposite direction. By the time the great Egyptian empires began to weaken, Kush had grown wiser and richer. From their capital at Nubia, the Kushite kings rose like resurrected lions. They built temples to the same gods who once ruled over them, but in their own image, carved from darker stone, shaped with southern pride. They called themselves sons of Amanirenas. Their priests spoke a divine purpose, that the true light of Egypt had not died, but had simply migrated south, to the land of Kush. The mountains of Jebel Barkal became their holy site, a lonely pinnacle rising from the desert plain, said to be the dwelling of the god Amanirenas himself. There, the Kushite kings crowned themselves not merely as rulers, but as divine heirs. They did not steal Egypt's legacy. They believed they were its saviors. Imagine the scene. The morning sky burns red. Priests chant beneath the mountain shadow. The air smells of frankincense and river dust. A new king kneels before the god's temple. And when he rises, he is not just king of Kush, but pharaoh of two lands. This was not rebellion. It was reclamation. The Egyptians once called the South Tarseti, the land of the bow. Now the bow was drawn, and for the first time in history it would strike north. This was the birth of a golden dream, an African empire that refused to be forgotten. From the ruins of fallen Egypt, Kush was reborn, a phoenix of sand and stone. They built pyramids smaller, but steeper than those of Giza, their sharp peaks piercing the heavens, their tombs filled with gold jewelry, iron weapons, and the whispers of gods older than time. Each pyramid, each scarab, each carving of Amanirenas with Nubian features was a declaration. Kush is not Egypt's shadow. Kush is Egypt's soul reborn. But power, once tasted, is never satisfied. As the Nile flowed north, so did the ambition of Kush's kings. In their hearts burned an ancient prophecy that the rightful rulers of Egypt would come again from the south, and soon the world would remember their names. In the next breath of history, Kush will rise against the very empire that once enslaved it. And in that clash, Africa will crown its forgotten pharaohs. And rose they did. But there comes a moment in every nation's story when the oppressed rise not just to resist, but to rule. For centuries, Kush had lived under the gaze of Egypt, first as a colony, then as a student, and now as a rival. The priests of Amanirenas whispered of destiny. They said the divine light had fled north, but would return carried by sons of the south. And in the heart of Nubia, a man began to believe those whispers. His name was Piye. To Egypt, he was a barbarian from Nubia. To his people, he was a god-made flesh. Piye was no mere warrior. He was a believer. He looked upon Egypt, torn by chaos, ruled by feuding princes, and saw weakness. He saw opportunity. And in that moment, the Nile itself seemed to carry a message southward. It is time. When Piye marched north with his army, it was not a foreign invasion. It was a return home. From the deserts of Nubia to the lush delta, His banners flew with the emblem of Amanirenas, the ram-headed god, protector of kings. He conquered not with cruelty, but with ceremony. Each Egyptian city that fell before him was commanded not to fear, but to purify, to cleanse themselves in the Nile, to submit not to man, but to divine will. Piye's campaign was swift, precise, almost spiritual. He did not burn the temples. He prayed within them. He did not destroy Egypt's heritage. He restored it in his own image. By the time his chariots reached Memphis, the city surrendered without blood, and in that sacred moment, for the first time in history, the crown of Egypt rested on a Kushite head. The Black Pharaohs had come. Under Piye and his successors, the 25th dynasty was born, a dynasty unlike any before it. These were kings who spoke the language of Egypt, but dreamed in the soul of Africa. From Thebes to Nubia, their temples rose like mountains of devotion to Amanirenas, to Ra, to the ancestors. They rebuilt cities, revived rituals, and brought back the old gods that Egypt had forgotten. When Piye died, his son Shabaka continued the divine mission, strengthening unity between North and South. But it was his nephew, Taharqa, who would become legend. Taharqa, the warrior king, a man whose name still echoes in the stones of Nubia. He ruled not through conquest alone, but through vision. He saw himself as a protector of all Nile lands, the bridge between gods and mortals. Under Taharqa, the kingdom flourished. Fields bloomed, temples sang, the Nile flowed with trade and worship alike. For a brief, golden moment, Africa stood united under a single crown. But history is never content with peace. To the east, a new power had risen. The Assyrians, fierce and unstoppable. Their empire stretched like iron across Mesopotamia, and their eyes turned toward Egypt. When the Assyrian armies swept across the Levant, Egypt called for help, and Taharqa, proud, defiant, a pharaoh of dark skin and golden blood, answered. He led his armies north once more, standing against an empire of steel and fire. The battle was brutal, two worlds colliding at the edge of civilization. In the end, Taharqa fought valiantly, but the tide was too strong. The Assyrians advanced. Memphis fell, and the Black Pharaoh was forced to retreat, not in defeat, but in dignity. He returned to Kush, his body weary, his spirit still burning. There, under the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal, he continued to rule, to build, to pray. He never reclaimed Egypt, but he never lost his kingdom. And when he died, his people buried him beneath a pyramid of their own making, its sides steep, its summit sharp, its silence eternal. Today, those pyramids still stand, not in Cairo, but in the sands of Sudan. Their stones whisper a truth forgotten by many, that Africa, too, once wore the crown of civilization. The empire of Kush had challenged Egypt, and for a generation it had ruled it. But like all empires, the sands of time were moving. As the Assyrians withdrew, as Egypt fell into the hands of new kings, Kush turned inward to the heart of Africa, where a new city of iron and fire waited. The age of Nubia was ending. The age of Meroe was about to begin. And there, the kingdom of Kush would be reborn again, not as conquerors, but as creators. The sun sets slowly over the Nubian desert. The sand glows red, then gold, then black. Once, this land sang with drums and prayers. Now it breathes in silence. This is the twilight of Kush, the last echo of a civilization that defied empires, that carved its name in stone and sky alike. But even as the light fades, something still burns in the dust. After Taharqa's reign, the heart of Kush shifted southward, away from Nubia's sacred cliffs, to a place where the desert met iron and fire. That place was known as Meroe. Here, on the banks of the Nile, a new capital rose, vibrant, strange, alive. Its walls rang with the sound of iron forges, its air thick with incense and trade. They called it the city of smoke and gold, while the world beyond changed. While Greece dreamed of gods and Rome sharpened its swords, Kush stood tall in the south, quietly powerful, proudly African. In Meroe, the queens ruled beside kings. Some ruled instead of the kings. They were the Kandakes, warrior queens, divine mothers, leaders of armies, and keepers of faith. Their names, Amanirenas, Amanishakito, Amanitor, still echo through the desert like prayers carved in wind. When Rome conquered Egypt, they turned their eyes south, expecting another easy victory. But they met Amanirenas. The Romans called her the one-eyed queen. They came with iron legions and banners of empire, but she met them with bows, elephants, and thunder in one bold strike. Her army stormed into Egypt, tore down the statue of Augustus, and sent its bronze head rolling through the sand. She took it home to Meroe and buried it beneath the steps of her temple, so that every day she walked upon the face of Rome. Rome eventually signed peace with her. Not conquest, peace. Few can say that. Fewer still could stand against the empire of the world and walk away unbroken. For centuries, Meroe thrived. It became a crossroads of cultures, where Egyptian gods met African spirits, where Greek traders brought stories of the wider world, and where blacksmiths forged iron so pure that travelers thought it divine. Its art was graceful, its writing unique, a script known today as Meroitic, still only half deciphered, its secrets whispering in the silence of stone. But time is a patient hunter. The world around Kush began to shift. Trade routes changed. Resources thinned. Neighbors grew hungry. The once mighty empire began to fade. By the 4th century, its cities lay quiet, its temples swallowed by sand. And yet, even in decline, Kush refused to die in shame. When the desert finally reclaimed Meroe, it covered not defeat, but dignity. For over 2,000 years, Kush had stood between Africa and the world, absorbing, creating, teaching, surviving. It gave humanity its first iron empire, its boldest queens, its black pharaohs who ruled the Nile with faith and fire. The world forgot their names, but the land did not. Even now, when the desert wind moves through Meroe's pyramids, it hums like a hymn to eternity. It whispers, "We were here. We built. We ruled. We remembered. And though our temples have fallen, our story still breathes in the blood of every descendant, in the rhythm of every drum, in the pride of every voice that says, Africa was never silent. The kingdom of Kush did not vanish. It transformed into legend,